Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Lecture Series. Sit back, get comfortable, and let's go see what they have for us today.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of the Wednesday morning lecture series put on by the Peninsula Seniors here in Rancho Palos Verdes. We're going to be carrying on our historical bent on our programs. Last week we talked about Rolling Hills and we learned all about that city. And this week we have an extraordinary program learning all about the formation of the Palos Verdes Peninsula, which eventually led to the creation of Rancho Palos Verdes, the city that we're in right now. Our speaker today is a member of the Vanderlip family, and Frank Vanderlip and a group of investors way back in 1913 purchased 16,000 acres, which became the Palos Verdes Peninsula. Our speaker, Don Christie, is going to be talking to us about the history of the family, the development of the Palos Verdes project, and some interesting insights into the family. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Don Christie.
Thank you very much. I'm really flattered to see a full house here. I wasn't expecting so many people, but I'm happy just the same. My name is Don Christie, and I'm going to explain to you how I'm part of this Vanderlip family. In 1966, we moved here to Palos Verdes. We lived right off of Plainfield, and we purchased a house in Seaview. A few years later, my mom and my real dad got divorced, and my mom went to this thing that she was told to go. It's called Parents Without Partners, and she met my stepdad, John Vanderlip. And talk about opposites attracting. Big, tall, skinny Dutch guy, short, 4'11", French, Greek, Italian lady who's not really thin. And they were perfect together. Everybody has their own beliefs. I'm a real big believer in the ordinal position. If you're born the first, the second, the oldest, the youngest, I really think it plays an important part in your life. And it sure did for my mom and my stepdad. They were both the youngest of big families, and they hit it off. Well, they got married in 1971. We moved to his house over in Westfield. And I remember in the summer of 1977, we got a phone call from my stepdad, John Vanderlip, his brother, Frank Jr. Frank Jr. and John and Calvin were the three sons of Frank Sr. And they had three daughters also, which we're going to go into in a little bit. Frank Jr. had called my stepdad, John Vanderlip, and said, brother, I've got cancer. I've got to get money for chemotherapy. So what I want to do is I want to sell you our old home back. And my stepdad was elated. And he just could not drive from that side of the hill to this side of the hill fast enough to see the house. He hadn't been there in a long time. He had grown up there in the summertime of his youth. So he went there, he saw the house, made the deal with Frank Jr., and we purchased the house. So he says, Don, come on with me. I'm going to show you what the house is. This is where we're going to be moving into. So I said, okay, oh boy, here we go. Well, I remember before my mom had married John Vanderlip, I've heard of the Venner Mansion, and let's face it, we've all gone up there. We've all taken a look. We're looking for the ghosts that don't exist. And I'll go into that in a few minutes. So we go there and I check out the house, and it was in horrible condition. It had been abandoned for many years, spider webs in the corners, cracks in the ceilings, electricity that works some of the time, too many fireplaces, but no fire, no wood, just an old house. Well, my mom and my stepdad sunk their teeth into it, and with a lot of help from myself, and we restored the home. So now it's a beautiful old home, and that is actually the very first house built in Palos Verdes that was built in 1916. What makes this house especially interesting is Mr. Frank Vanderlip had taken his time about doing a meteorological study as to where he wanted this house to be. So he had a meteorological study done, and he determined that this was the place. So he started building the house, and halfway through the house, his wife, Narcissa, said, honey, we've got a problem here. We've got a beautiful location, a beautiful house, but we're tilted the wrong way. Catalina is here. The house is like this. How are we going to see Catalina except for if we go into the porch? So they moved the house a little bit. So now when you go into the living room, there's the view, thanks to Narcissa Vanderlip. So for all of you guys who are still married to your wives, yes, women do play an important part in correcting us. So we moved into this house in 1977, and we started fixing it up. And it was a lot of work, but the house turned out to be beautiful. My mom, we're of French, Greek, and Italian ancestry. My mom just dug her teeth into it and decorated it. We looked everywhere to find as a wallpaper, carpeting as closest to the original as we could. And we used as many of the original pieces that we had in the house. After 2 years, the house turned out to be just beautiful. And we started entertaining and bringing people in. And my mom loved to cook. Of course, being French, Greek, Italian ancestry, you can imagine the food that came out of the kitchen. And with that, the kitchen door became the front door, okay? No longer the front door into the formal living room. No, 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 no. You came into the kitchen door. We had to feed you before you sat down. So that became the front door. And the only time we really used the front door is when we had formal company. Ken Dida, his wife, we had all kinds of people, the Jesters who used to live down the street from us, some of the early families that were still here, probably some of the seniors that you may have known maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago would come to our house and we would entertain. So our house became the place to entertain, and it's a beautiful home. We still live there now. My mom passed away November of last year, so now we're selling the house, and we get a group of people, I call them the Lexus looky-loos. What they'll do is they'll read an article in the paper, oh, the Vanderlip house is up for sale. So we get people in their Lexuses and their Mercedes and their BMWs, and they come in packs of 4. Oh, look, there's the house. Look, there's the pillars. Look, look, look. And then I wave to them, they smile at me, and they turn around and they leave. So we have that happen frequently. Now, all of you have probably heard about the haunted mansion, right? Okay. So once and for all, we're going to set the story straight. I'm going to tell you exactly what that whole thing is, all right? People say that there's ghosts. People say that there's been murders. People say that there's dogs up there barking with no voices. Well, there's a little bit of truth and there's a lot of fiction. So let's go into the real truth of it. Ellen Vanderlip, who is my stepfather's brother's widow. Did I lose anybody here yet? No. She was living in the mansion next door to us. And this is how it works. We've got 4 homes up there on the top of Vanderlip Drive. We've got the big orange home, my little tiny home, the cottage, and then we have the mansion. So the mansion has a separate gate opening to it, and for good reason. On Friday and Saturday nights, we get all kinds of people come up, and they're looky-loos, and a lot of them are from different parts of South Bay, and they come and they want to see if there is a ghost. They're determined that there's a ghost there. Well, there isn't. The ghost was Ellen Vanderlip's father. He's an old Norwegian man. Light skin, white hair. And he'd walk around with this old gown that was white. He had his little night beanie on that would come. Remember, you've probably seen those from old cartoons and old movies. And he'd walk around with the lantern. Ellen Vanderlip did not like the noise of the peacocks, so what she did is that she removed all the voice boxes of all of her dogs. So a 19, 20, 22-year-old would come up there after a few drinks, and he'd bring his girlfriend, hey, let's go up to the Vanderlip house. And they would drive up, and they see this old man walking around. And they see these 2 dogs. So that's how the whole story of the haunted mansion got perpetuated. So now you guys know the story. That's it. Okay? It was all Ellen Vanderlip's father's fault. So to this day, we still have visitors. They come up to the house on Friday and Saturday nights. Well, Ellen passed away in June of '09. Her son, Calvin Jr., and his lovely wife, Michelle, now live there. So I told him, I said, look, you know, I've been keeping an eye on your place and keeping an eye on your mom and getting rid of these visitors. I said, I'm getting kind of tired of it. It's just something you could do. So he came up with an ingenious idea. So the car will come up to the gate, some visitor, we'll call them visitors, and a flashlight would come on. And that's a camera. So now there's a picture taken of who was ever up there. And there's also a barbed wire fence. So now the people are not, they're just coming, they look, and they turn around, they leave. After all these years, we finally got some peace and quiet. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about Frank Vanderlip, because I think that's probably one of the things that many of you would like to know about. Frank Vanderlip was an interesting man. He was a self-made millionaire. He was a self-made man. He taught himself shorthand. He was a president of First National Bank, of First City Bank, which became, of course, Bank of America. He heard about Palos Verdes, and he had seen a few pictures, but he has never really seen Palos Verdes. And he saw what a development this could be, and he wanted to pursue his ambitions. So he bought Palos Verdes, as we know it, 16,000 acres, from Mr. Bixby. Now, this is where this comes in. This is Mr. Bixby's house, right here. This is the Bixby Ranch, right here. This intersection, here's where Kelly's Corner, the general store is. Dapple Gray School. Okay? So this is how it all started. This is Mr. Bixby's ranch right here, which is actually one of the very first structures in Palos Verdes. Our house, 99 Vanderlip Drive, was actually the very first home built in Palos Verdes. All the other homes that were there prior to that were all ranch homes, and they're no longer in existence. The Ishibashis had ranch homes over there right where the slide area ends and you go into the Seaview neighborhood. If you go up on the hills up there, that's where the old Ishibashi homes were. This is how it all started right here. Mr. Bixby. Mr. Bixby sold, we hear between 16 and 17,000 acres of Palos Verdes to Frank Vanderlip. So what he did is he did his meteorological study. He built the house that we live in, that I live in now, and as we know, is the very first house built on the hill. After that, this is where things get kind of interesting. How many of you guys remember the old movie, it's a mad, 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 mad world, with the W's, okay? That house is on the other side. When you go into the Narcissa Gate, there's a home there, belongs to Dan Pinkham. That home there was the home that you went in and you spoke to the agents, okay, I want to build a home, or if there's any homes available and how big and all the details of what you wanted to purchase or what did you want to see. That house there, Mr. Dan Pinkham's house, was actually designed after an Italian chapel, and Dan Pinkham has now restored his home into its former glory. It's really beautiful. If you ever have a chance to meet Dan Pinkham and talk to him and maybe even see pictures of the inside of his house. Across the street from him is one of the homes. There was 3 homes that Frank Vanderlip built immediately. The first one, of course, is 99 Vanderlip Drive. The other one is across the street on the ocean side of Narcissa. That home there belonged to, there was the Hardins. Mr. Hardin was one of the investors with Frank Vanderlip. So he built a home for one of his investors. Well, it just so happened, Mr. Hardin's wife was Frank Vanderlip's sister. Okay? She was one of the very, very early people, besides Frank, her brother, to see the beauty in Palos Verdes. So we can thank her for keeping Abalone Cove undeveloped. She had this vision. We're going to keep this area. She was actually the very first conservativist as we know it, and the very first female conservativist. So she demanded that this whole area would never be built along Abalone Cove. So if you take a look, there's Abalone Cove, I don't know if you've ever been to the old beach club when it was open years ago, but that whole area there will never ever be developed because of her. Now, let's go down the street a little bit. So here we are on Palos Verdes, drive south. There's the Dan Pinkins home, which is the gatehouse. Across the street is the house I just described to you. Let's go down a little bit, and that big jump that we all know about over there. And then there's the pepper tree entrance. You go into the pepper tree entrance. The very first house on the left was the old Benedict house. Mr. Benedict was a friend of Frank Vanderlip, so he built him a home. The house is still standing there, and I'm going to be showing you some pictures of that here in just a little bit. And it's interesting, that house is still there. It has moved down maybe 40 feet from its original position. And but it's still beautiful. There's a few cracks in the ground. There's a few places that probably need some touch up, but it's a beautiful home, very pretty home. So those are the first 3 homes that were built in Palos Verdes. The mansion, as we know it, where Ellen Vanderlip lived, came in 1921, and that was going to be actually a guest house. Well, Frank Vanderlip got a little caught up, and he went a little crazy and made that place actually bigger than he had planned. So what happened, he had celebrities who were very, very interested in renting that house. We had people like Peter Ustinov, Charles Lawton, Elsa Manchester, Peter Sellers. And it was an interesting thing that I found out recently. Dr. Seuss had lived in my house in the 50s. So I wondered if the peacocks gave him any inspiration for some of his characters. Okay, what I wanted to do is also tell you a few more things about Frank Vanderlip. Frank Vanderlip loved birds. So across the street from our house, if you go down across the street, there's an old duck pond. It's like a big half circle. And what he had there was a ton of ducks, and he had an aviary behind the duck pond. This aviary had all kinds of birds. Now you're thinking to yourself, okay, we've got the duck pond, we've got the birds, why do we need the peacocks? Okay, the peacocks actually came first. Somebody had suggested to Frank Vanderlip, oh, you know, Mr. Vanderlip, this place is just too quiet. We need to do something. Well, here's how the story goes, and I got this from my stepdad, so basically I got it from the horse's mouth. Basically, Mr. Wrigley had a daughter who thought that the peacocks needed a home in Portuguese Bend. She brought 2 cages with 9 peacocks each, and that's how the peacocks started. So right by the duck pond are the 2 cages where the peacocks came from. They're metal cages, really old, and they're still intact. So here we have the duck pond. We have the cages, and we have the aviary behind it. Well, Mr. Vanderlip, loving birds as much as he did, he hired a man called the Bird Doc. Bird Doc got a house too. So he had his little house down on the other side of the duck pond. And he was there until Mr. Vanderlip's passing. Mr. Frank Vanderlip passed in 1937. When he passed away, his son decided to give the aviary to the Wrigley family. So they got all the birds. So we started with 18 peacocks. We gave them back probably about 40 birds. So I don't know if that's even how it works, but it works. So that's the story of the peacocks. Now, whether you like them or you don't like them, they're here to stay. You know, that's the official story. You could read in books that there was a gentleman named Lucky Baldwin who brought him in. That's not true. Lucky Baldwin had passed before the peacocks had come over. Okay. Now, this is kind of interesting. We have Donald Trump, who built his golf course, as we know it. The golf course was originally Mr. Ishibashi's farmland. Okay, he used to have garbanzo beans. How do I know this? I used to live across the street. We used to live in Seaview. So we'd go across the street and we'd take walks, and there's all these garbanzo beans. When I was 13, I got a dirt bike. I was going on the dirt roads down there. We'd see the harvester. We would go down and we'd see the bunkers that were there, placed there during World War II. During World War II, if you lived along the Palos Verdes coast or if you lived in San Pedro, you were not allowed to have your lights on in your house at night. You had to have your lights off. And they were always looking for Japanese submarines coming in. And if you went into some of the bunkers there, they'd have a little slot about this long, about this wide. You'd climb down and you could take a look at the ocean, and they would have telescopes, they would have high-powered binoculars for the time, and you could actually see, kind of get a feel of what these soldiers were doing. Well, Donald Trump filled those bunkers with cement, so they're no longer available to the public, which I think he probably did it for safety reasons because they were pretty scary. I mean, you had to walk down a tiny little ladder to get down into them. So that whole area there was all farmland. Now, the Ishibashis owned a lot of land in the Portuguese Bend area. If you go over where Marineland is, where now Terranea is, and you look up and you see the farmland up on the hillside of the drive, that used to belong to the Gitanos. The Gitanos and the Ishibashis were friends. They had both come in to Japan way, way back at the very, very late part of the 19th century, as we know it, and they started farming, and they found this ground to be very good. So what happened when it belonged to the Bixbys, they'd farm and they'd farm all, and they'd farm to no end. Then when Frank Vanderlip came, they started renting the farmland from him. But what happened is Frank started building, so things started changing. So the farmlands became smaller. So you had the Hitano farm here, you had the Ishibashi farms there, and then they started building homes in Portuguese Bend and different other areas. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you guys through a little historical journey here, and I'm going to show you some very interesting pictures. These pictures were commissioned by Frank Vanderlip in the very early 30s by Spence Aerial Photos. And what he did is he took pictures of various areas of Palos Verdes so he could decide how he was going to develop them. So let's start with this. This is Mr. Bixby's house right there. Now, you've heard of Phillips Ranch. The reason why they called it Phillips Ranch is because Mr. Phillips actually was the manager of the Bixby farm here. And what he did is he got together with Frank Vanderlip and planted trees all over. Because take a look. There's no trees, folks. There's no trees. There's nothing. Why in the heck did they call it Green Hills? I'll never understand. But this is the story right here. This is one of the earliest pictures that I know of Palos Verdes as we know it. This was taken in 1931. So you have your intersection right here where Kelly's Corner General Store is, Dalple Gray School, and Phillips Ranch. You go up here behind the gates, there's no homes. And you can barely see it, but there's 2 water towers right up there, which was going to change to 3 water towers, and then later on we had water as we know it. Here's that same intersection a few years later. So here's your entry going in up to behind the gates, and of course you had your tennis courts. And you can see right here, these are bales of hay. So Mr. Bixby had this whole area here where he could farm. You can go up here, and guess what? Now we've got 3 water towers. And this is the very, very beginning of the development as we know it of Rolling Hills. This is the intersection of PV Drive North. This is Portuguese Bend Road and Rolling Hills Road. So if you followed that road down, that would take you over to the Phillips Ranch. So it was very close for him to have access to this. Here we go, 3 years later. Now we've got the general store right here. And look at the development. Look how it all started. This is some of the very, very first of the very beginning of the development of Rolling Hills. Got Williamsburg Lane. This was an interesting picture because if you take a look, you can still see Catalina back here. This is an early picture of Portuguese Bend. Now, all those things that I was talking about earlier, now I'm going to show them to you. So right here is the Jardin House that I was telling you about where they filmed It's a Mad, 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 Mad World with the big W's. This was one of the very first homes that Frank Vanderlip built for his business associates. This is Portuguese Bend right here, and we have Portuguese Bend, we have Portuguese Point and Inspiration Point, and right about here is where the glass church would be, as we know it. In the lower left corner, this is the Jardin House right here. Now, the Jardin House was interesting because this was the first time Frank Vanderlip had built a home on the ocean coast. He preferred his homes with views and up a little higher. That's one of the reasons why 99 Vanderlip Drive is where it is. But his business associate and his sister really loved this location, so they built this house right here. And right across the street here is Dan Pinkins House, which I was telling you was designed after an old Italian chapel. That's right across the street from this, so you can just go right across the street. So these two homes are very, very important in the history of Palos Verdes. Now, at this time, they didn't know that this was a landslide area. Nobody knew. So guess what? They were going to put a hotel here. Well, found out very soon that they weren't able to. Right over here, if you take a look on the middle of the right-hand corner here, these are the old Ishibashi farm homes right here. These were actually some of the earliest ranch homes in Palos Verdes. The Ishibashis farmed all of this, and of course across the street, further down the road on the other side of the street where Trump is, that was all Ishibashi farmland. These are the caves, these caves right here in the middle, on the lower middle part of the picture. These are the caves that the Portuguese used to hide their buried treasures in. The reason why they put them there is because the Spanish had the control of the harbor. So what they would do is they would come here and put their buried treasures inside here. Now, this is the Shriver House. Every year, the Shrivers have a arts and crafts show in December. The reason why this house is of significance, this was the livery house. Is where all the supplies to build the homes in Portuguese Bend came from. So you had your mules, you had your donkeys, you had your carts, you had your trucks, you had all your building supplies. And that's the Shriver House right there, and it still exists. It's a beautiful home. If you have any interest in history, usually the second week of December, they have their big arts and crafts show. Forget about the arts and crafts. Look at the home. It's gorgeous. It's really pretty. Plus, you get free wine and beer and cookies and nuts. So it's a great place. This right here, which would be the middle of the picture, is the sliding area of Portuguese Bend, which they started building homes in the late 40s and the early 50s. What happened was two things. They did not know, again, that this was a sliding area. And right over here, past the second point, they started building an area which we know as Portuguese Bend Beach Club. This was the original Portuguese Bend Beach Club. When they decided to bring Crenshaw up from the top and bring it over to Portuguese Bend, we started having trouble. If you take a look right here, you can barely see it over here on your right side. The soil level on the street is higher than the street. Now if you drive by it, the soil level is lower. Why? They took a lot of the soil from there, brought it up to the top of the hill, and they built those fire roads that are up there. Those were going to be the roads that would take you from the top of Crenshaw to Portuguese Bend, because they didn't have Hawthorne back there. Hawthorne didn't come into existence until 1965. Okay? So they started building Crenshaw. Big mistake. What happened is when they started building Crenshaw, they started running the water tables, they started using explosives. 100 homes in the sliding area here of Portuguese Bend were lost. Almost all the homes here in the old Portuguese Bend Beach Club were gone. The house that I live in, which is a very small little house, 3/4 the size of this room, 483 square feet, is the last of the homes that survived, and it was also the model home. So what my stepdad did is he arranged for that house to be brought up from here up to next door to 99 Vanderlip Drive, so it's 98 Vanderlip Drive. Okay? Very small little home. Leaks, but it's a great little home. It's very, very well built. This gives you an idea of what Portuguese Bend used to look like. The reason why this picture is important, if you take a look right in the middle, you see this big crevice right here. This is interesting because this picture's in 1931. There was a big earthquake in 1933 that was based in Long Beach, and it had moved the soil around considerably. So this is one of the earliest pictures of the sliding area as we know it. Right here, you could see this is the Ishibashi farm homes. This picture was taken the same day as the other picture. It was just taken at a different angle. And what's important here is you can see a lot of homes. This is the Venner Mansion, right here, 100 Vanderlip Drive, 99 Vanderlip Drive, where I live. And then right next door is a little orange home. The orange home is fascinating. Edwin Everett Horton bought the orange home from Frank Vanderlip in 1966. Now, for those of you who don't know who Edwin Everett Horton was, he was a narrator of Rocky and Bullwinkle. He was also an actor. He bought this house from the Vanderlips in 1966. Prior to his purchase of the house, that house was kept for the drivers, for the working crew, for the garage, and it also had its own working pump because there's no gas stations around. You'd have to go into San Pedro and look for one. So the pump is still there. The home is still there. It's beautiful. It's painted a terracotta color. And Edwin Everett Horton's granddaughter now lives there. And they really did a wonderful job of maintaining that home. It's just a lovely home. If you ever have a chance to go up and see it, you can see it. It's a gorgeous home. So those are the three homes right there. Something else that's very interesting. This is the old writing club right here. Okay? This is one of the first things that Frank Vanderlip did besides build his homes, and this was part of what we call the Palos Verdes project. The Palos Verdes project was basically, he had a vision. His vision was to make the area right up above the lighthouse into an artisan colony. It was going to be an Italian artisan colony. They were going to have jewelers, they were going to have artists, they were going to have all kinds of people who made beautiful pieces of art, and that's what that whole idea was, but it never came to fruition. So actually, in terms of his Palos Verdes project, it was the 3 homes that he had built, actually the 5 homes he was built, plus this. Now, here's something that very, very few people know, and I'm going to share this with you because I think you're going to find this very interesting. Take a look right here. This is the writing club right here as we know it. Right over here, we have a little terrace right here. Right here, Frank Vanderlip was going to build a huge mansion. He wanted to compete with William Hearst. Well, he wasn't going to build a home as big as William Hearst, but he was going to build a gorgeous home with an incredible view and call it his. These are some of the architectural renderings of the home. This was going to be one gorgeous home. He was going to abandon 99 Vanderlip Drive and live in here. What happened in 1929, we had the stock market crash, and that's what stopped him. If we didn't have that, I can guarantee you this home would have been built. To show you an idea of how big the home was going to be, there's a person standing there. Very few people know about this. This was his big secret. This was the one thing that he really wanted to do but didn't or couldn't. This is the front. This would have been the front of the home. So right now, Mr. York owns all this property right here. He bought it a few years ago, and he has himself a little clubhouse, and he has a little vineyard growing, but that was originally going to be the big mansion, the big Vanderlip Mansion. This was his going to be his big signature, let everybody know this was going to be his house. This is an incredible picture. A lot of people don't know this, but this is where Prudential Center is, right here. Prudential Center was originally a marshland. Peninsula Center right here. This was originally, this area, if you take a look at the picture, the light part on the top, that was the marshland where Peninsula Center is, Rolling Hills as we know it. I used to sell these pictures at arts and crafts shows, and this elderly German lady came up to me and she goes, I remember that. And I said, really? She goes, yeah. They had a German intern camp. A lot of people didn't know it, but they had a German intern camp there in World War II. So if you were German, that's where, and you lived locally, that's where they would keep you during World War II. The Japanese were bussed away in their own intern camps. If you take a look, this is Palos Verdes Drive North right here. They had Crenshaw up on the top, which you could barely see. This is Pacific Coast Highway, and this is the very beginnings of Hollywood Riviera. And here's the beach. Here's the golf course, Malaga Cove. They had the Chandler Building already there. They had a few stores already there, and they even had a gas station there. So you take a look, this is the coastline right here. This is one of the earliest pictures of Palos Verdes. These are the oil derricks. This is where the Torrance Airport is right here on the lower left part of the picture. This was the beginning of Palos Verdes Drive West. They had hired a bunch of prisoners to come and to build the road. I don't know if they would say hired, but I guess this is better than standing in a small space in a prison. You can see the backside of the hill right here. So this is, they were building Palos Verdes Drive West as we know it. Actually, it was Palos Verdes Drive West and Palos Verdes Drive South. If you know, you go down to the very bottom of Hawthorne, to the left would be Palos Verdes Drive South, to the right is Palos Verdes Drive West. So this is, they're building, they used, they didn't have very many trucks back then to use, so they used a lot of horse and carts. And here's the celebration. This is the big celebration. They had finally finished the road.
Malaga Cove?
That's Malaga Cove.
Is that a bus there?
That's a truck.
No, the one on the right, towards the top. One more, to the left. That's it. What's that?
That's a bus. That's a bus. So this is the very beginning of Palos Verdes Drive, which we know at Palos Verdes Drive South and Palos Verdes Drive West. 1935 advertisement, come to Palos Verdes and buy a home. This is it right here. This is one of the very, very early ads that I found in my stepdad's closet. When my stepdad had passed away in 2001, I didn't know he had these pictures. So I was cleaning out his closet and I found all these pictures just stacked up. And I said, oh, I got to do something with these. I want to share these with people who are interested in the history. So I saw this and I said, this is fascinating. This is a very, very simple ad. It shows you where it is. It shows you a little bit in relationship to San Pedro, the LA Harbor, and Wilmington. Do you know where that is? Yeah. That's Malaga Cove. And they were doing the christening of the road. Palos Verdes Drive South and Palos Verdes Drive West. This is one of the very earliest pictures of the lighthouse. The lighthouse came in 1926. If you look at the lighthouse, this whole area up above the lighthouse is where Frank Vanderlip wanted to build that big artisan colony, but he just couldn't get it done. But this was his big dream. But they put the lighthouse here, and from what I understand, a lot of sailors do not like taking their boats through here. It's treacherous waters, as we found out in 1961 with the Dominator. An early picture of some horse riding. Back in the 20s and the 30s, you could take your horses down to Lanada Bay, Malaga Cove, down to the beaches there and go riding. And this is one of the pictures. Here's another one right here. And basically what they were showing is showing a lifestyle. Yes, if you came and you bought a home in Palos Verdes, you too could own a horse and take it down to the beach and go riding. It was that open. A very early picture of the La Venta Inn. The La Venta Inn was a fascinating place. A lot of people got married, a lot of celebrities got married, a lot of celebrities would come to Palos Verdes looking for a home, and they would stay in the La Venta Inn while they're looking around. And it was strategically located in a place, as you well know, we have an incredible view of the coastline. The La Venta Inn is up above Malga Cove. If you take the windy road, going up to the top, that's where the La Venta Inn is. It's been there since the late 20s, early 30s. This is the Chandler Building. This is one of the earliest pictures of the Chandler Building. Do you know the Chandler Building in Malga Cove? One of the very, very first buildings ever built in Malga Cove. This is one of the earliest pictures of it right here. Okay, for those of you who like to golf, this is one of the earliest pictures of the old golf course. And this is the dining room. You come in, you park your car, and you can go golfing. Here it is. This is the golf house itself, the one that we know off of Via Campesina, over there by Malga Cove. This is one of the earliest pictures. Take a look at the way everybody dressed back then. This is the way you dressed. This was the leisurely lifestyle of Palos Verdes, and this is what they were trying to sell. These were actually ad pictures. This is one of our last pictures. This goes to show you what Palos Verdes actually looked like before it was developed. So we have Portuguese Bend here, where Marineland is, White Point, Point Vincenti, Sacred Cove, and then you've got Redondo Beach, you've got Crest Road up here on the top, you've got San Pedro, and you've got Long Beach. So this is what Palos Verdes actually looked like when Frank Vanderlip came in 1916. This is what he looked at, and he saw a treasure. He said, we can develop this and make this beautiful. And I think he did a pretty good job. I think his ideas of how he wanted Palos Verdes to be were kind of different from maybe the way things turned out, but I think his visions were great. I mean, he really saw this hill for what it was, a beautiful place to live, and that's why we all live here and love living here. I can't think of any other place I'd rather live. And that's the last of our pictures here. What I wanted to show you also was, if you take a look at the very top of the hill, the middle of the picture, there's no development. But when you go down here, you could see that those are the early homes of Rolling Hills. Those pictures that I showed you in the very beginning, where that intersection is, we're up above the general store, Palos Verdes Drive North, and Rolling Hills Road and Portuguese Bend Road. These are the early homes right here. These homes, and then we have the early homes here of Portuguese Bend. So in essence, basically the earliest homes in Palos Verdes were Portuguese Bend and Rolling Hills. Everything else came later. I think it's time for question and answer time. Thank you. The question was the marshlands up at Prudential Center where all the water went. I don't know. Ken Dida actually had an opportunity to buy Peninsula Center at one time. And he had some great ideas, him being an engineer, of how he was going to get rid of the water. I don't know. But they did get rid of the water.
Yes, I wonder where the road was situated when my father used to go down to Portuguese Bend to fish. I was born in 22, so this had to be done somewhere in the late 20s to the 30s. I imagine the late 20s.
You're asking me if there was a road that would take you down into Palos Verdes from San Pedro, is what you're asking
Yes.
me. As far as I know, there was a dirt road and there was a bunch of farm roads, but there weren't any real roads as we know them back in the 20s. The roads started coming probably about probably in the early 20s.
So that could be the Wells Fargo
That could be the Wells Fargo.
coach trail.
It-
One other thing, when you said your mother had the kitchen door, I used to sell Avon to her.
Oh!
And I live in Seaview, which you did. And I knew you when you were much younger.
I hope this isn't in color. My face is going to turn red.
No, this is before you grew a mustache. Anyway, she would invite me in, and I would be there at least an hour because she always had to make me Turkish coffee
Yes.
or make croissants
Yes.
or something to eat. She was most generous.
Very, very much so. Thank you very much. The Ishibashis were a wonderful family. When I grew up living in Seaview, we rode our motorcycles all over the place. Back then, you were allowed to take your motorcycle on any dirt road or any fire road and go riding. So we would leave Seaview and we would head over toward Portuguese Bend and the sliding area, and Mr. Ishibashi would have his big farm. And we had some troublemakers in our neighborhood that would hop on their motorcycles and just drive right through his crops. And Mr. Ishibashi was a nice guy, but enough is enough. So what he would do is he would get a special sawed-off shotgun with salt pellets, and he would shoot these guys. So the next day at school in Margate, we're 13 years old. Oh yeah, look at this! I got this big bruise from Mr. Ishibashi. You deserved it. I was friends with Mr. Ishibashi, and I had a little motorcycle, so I could not ride that bullet. So I said, Mr. Ishibashi, could I ride through your property? Yes, Don. And then we grew up to become friends, and I saw him. We went to the concours at Trump's 5 months before his passing. Mr. Ishibashi, James Ishibashi we're talking about, had cancer. He had a big lump on his neck. It was the size of a baseball, and that's what ended up killing him. He was married to Annie. Annie had that fruit stand, as we know it, for many, many years, the best fruit. And she had a daughter who passed away recently too. I just heard recently that Mr. Tom Ishibashi passed away. I think it was last month. And I don't know if there's any more Ishibashis left. Their home exists, and that's all I know at this point. Your question about Annie's stand never being vandalized, I think that had a lot to do with the respect that people had for her and her family. Mr. Ishibashi was not a religious person. His daughter was. She was a Christian, as we know it. And she always tried to convert him. It never worked. He says, religion is the dirt that I farm on. That is my religion. And he really stood by that. In a lot of interviews that he had back in the 70s and the 80s, he would state that. You'd see a picture of him, slender, muscular guy, especially for his age. This man was quite the farmer. He had a green thumb, and he did a fantastic job of farming. He was a workaholic. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Seuss lived in our house, 99 Vanderlip, during the 50s. Known as the cottage. The 99 Vanderlip Drive is the cottage. 100 Vanderlip Drive is the mansion. I think I need to make that clear now. The glass church, the land was donated by Frank Vanderlip, and it was I'm probably going to pronounce it, Swedenborg, yeah. And it was designed by, if I remember correctly, Frank Lloyd Wright, yeah. It's his son who designed it. It's a beautiful piece, but it was one of the very first churches built in Palos Verdes. The very first Portuguese Bend nursery school originated in Abalone Cove. That's where the first school started, and it was built in the 40s, and I think the last of it was the very early 60s.
We just had a grandchild, our third grandchild graduated, so it's current, and it's been going on. I just wondered if you remembered how it got started, who started it?
I don't have the answer. I just, the knowledge that I have was it started in the 40s and the 50s when they started bringing homes in Portuguese Bend. That's all I know of it. I wish I could give you more of an answer. Yes, sir.
Was Frank Vanderbilt responsible for this generally unified impression of the houses in Palos Verdes, that they have red roof and a green third house, which gives it sort of a unified view? Was he responsible?
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. He tended to like East Coast designs. If you take a look at 99 Vanderlip Drive, it's a Hudson Craftsman design, which is exactly the same design as his old home on the East Coast. So those were the designs that he favored. But in terms of other people building homes, he really didn't have any kind of a preference. The Palos Verdes project model, Ken Dida went to Italy and he had brought this model back here back in the 80s. And basically what it was a model of the vision that Frank Vanderlip was going to build. This was what Palos Verdes was going to be as far as Frank Vanderlip was concerned. This was the artisan homes, the artisan community above the lighthouse and above right around where Golden Cove is. It was going to be an artisan community, bunch of beautiful little homes. There was going to be all kinds of craftsmen. There was going to be a bunch of artists. And it's going to be an exchange. It was going to be a beautiful colony, very different from what we have now. But this was his vision. But he never was able to complete it. Yes, sir.
I've heard about that, but I had understood it was on display somewhere, and I've often wondered where. I'd like to see it.
I've seen it. Mary Rodman, who was head of the Palos Verdes Historical Society, is now not doing very well in terms of her health. She had the model on display at Malaga Cove School years ago. The last time I saw it was 2001 or 2002, and it was fascinating because the model was very, very accurate. Very accurate. You could see all the little details of it looked like a little Italy. It looked like a little Italy. It was called Nardi. And it was a little Italy, piece of Italy here in Palos Verdes that was supposed to have been built. But again, Mr. Vanderlip got held back twice, once because 1920 on the stock market crash, and also he passed away in 1937. Had he had more time and we didn't have the stock market crash, I think Palos Verdes would have been a very different place. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you talking about the area below the present City Hall?
Yes, ma'am.
So that's where it is now?
No, the model is, we know what the model, Mary Rodman knows where the model is. I don't know where it is, and I think Ken Dida does. I don't know where the model is sitting right now. But the last I saw it was 10 years ago at Lanada Bay. Okay, basically what he was asking is, there was a harbor down in Portuguese Bend. What I'd like to do is if we could go to the very first picture, and I think what I would like to do is expand on this, because this is fascinating. I was trying to get through this kind of quickly so we could ask questions, but this is what, this is the area that Mrs. Cox is talking about. This was the old Portuguese Bend Beach Club. Now, right here, they used to also have a yacht club. There was a yacht club down here. So when you bought a house down in Portuguese Bend, you had access to the beach and, of course, the yacht. Myself, growing up, this is going to make you laugh, growing up in Portuguese Bend in the late 60s, one of our rites of passage to be part of the gang was to jump off the pier that was there. Okay, so there was a pier right over here, and what we would have to do is go to the end of the pier and jump off of it. Well, it's 40 feet from the pier to the water, and the water is ice cold. So this is where Frank Vanderlip, it was Calvin Vanderlip's project, actually. After Frank Sr. passed away, his son Calvin took it over, Ellen's husband. And he had this whole area here. He had a pier, he had docks, he had homes built here. If you take a look now, you say, what? There's nothing there. But that's where the old Portuguese Bend Beach Club used to be. Can I have you stand up, sir?
We went down, we were looking at houses out here. And we went down and down to the club. We visited the club. And then the next time I come, it's in the water. And you can look down and you can see it actually the slide and the whole club is out underwater. And you can see it there. Can you still see it?
No, sir, you can't. You can't see anything now. Now it's just a beach where people walk down the cliff to. But what's interesting is this used to actually be, back in the 1800s, a whaling station. It was a Portuguese whaling station. And yes, sir. The question was, did the development of Crenshaw Did it do damage basically to Portuguese Bend? It brought on this, it did, it triggered it, because what happened, it ruined the water tables, and what happened is, there's this whole area here in the middle of the picture, Portuguese Bend, this is all a landslide. But if you buy a house there, there's parts of it where you don't have to worry about any movement. But along this side, right along here, there's a big, massive slide area where the ground just slides. And if you go there now, a lot of homes are moving down. If you drive along the cliff now, there are 2 homes right here that are just barely there. I say probably in the next 2-3 years they're going to be gone. So yes, the development of Crenshaw definitely brought on the landslide because of all the explosives and the deterioration of the water table. Yes, sir.
Did you also indicate that the earthquake had something to do with it?
Yes, sir. I think the earthquake did myself. I talked to a geologist, and he was telling me that the big earthquake, what it did is it shifted this whole area here quite a bit. This whole area here of the sliding area, Portuguese Bend, the farmland here of Mr. Ishibashi, the land had shifted after the big earthquake. They didn't have the big crevices that they used to have. Anybody else? This is the big Vanderlip Mansion in New York called Beechwood. This is where Frank Vanderlip's and his whole family used to live when they weren't living here in Portuguese Bend.
Is that New York City or something?
It's Scarsdale. Scarsdale. Well, you got a New York accent. I can hear it from here. This is a beautiful home. I was there in 1988. It's 30 bedrooms. It is gorgeous. Gorgeous old home out in the forest. And this gives an idea of some of the things that he accomplished in his life before he became known as the father of the peninsula.
Is that privately owned or is it a museum?
It is privately owned. The ancestors have owned it. What happened was when my stepfather, John, passed away in 2001, he was the last of the Vanderlip family as we know it. The rest of them were all offspring. So all the money that the Vanderlip family had was dispersed among the offspring, but they kept the house.
Let me mention, Don took these off the wall at the cottage.
Much to the chagrin of our real estate lady. So I wanted to share this with you. So this is a very old picture, but I wanted to share it with you. And really quickly, I wanted to show you this. This is 99 Vanderlip Drive. This is the house, the very first house built in Palos Verdes. This is the house that my mother and I lived in.
Don, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Senior Lecture Series. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.